Welcome to the Decode the Mystery channel, where supernatural mysteries, eerie ghost stories, and strange events are told in a truthful and captivating manner under the rain. I am your storyteller, and today's tale is titled The Secret of Death. Allow me to begin the story. That autumn, Europe was not as peaceful as usual. Cold winds slithered through the bare trees, bringing with them strange murmurs like whispers of the past that had not yet found rest. In a small riverside tavern in Strasbourg, an ancient town lying between the borders of France and Germany, a group of strangers had gathered, not to sip wine but to discuss an invitation, one none of them dared refuse. The invitation came from Professor Karl Dietrich, a renowned archaeologist, famous for his discovery of the ancient tomb of the Engelbrecht family beneath the ground of Bavaria. This time, he intended to lead an expedition into a little-known forest, Heidenwald Forest, a place known by the haunting name in folklore, the Silent Soul Forest. According to ancient manuscripts found in the Austrian National Library, the forest had once been the site of rituals by a forbidden cult during the Middle Ages. They believed that if the souls of those killed were not sacrificed properly, they would remain trapped between two worlds, becoming silent ones. Numerous disappearances had occurred over the centuries, but no one had dared to investigate thoroughly. In the dim tavern, the 8 people who had accepted the invitation sat around a round table. Professor Karl Dietrich, expedition leader, 61 years old, aged but sharp. Clara Voss, Swiss investigative journalist, young, bold, specializing in the supernatural. David Roux, French technician and filmmaker, always carrying a drone. John Ellis, British parapsychologist, who frequently meditates and can sense energy fields. Rachel Bauman, archaeology student, personal assistant to the professor. Robert Bobby Klein, German ex-military, hired as a guide and protector. Jane Lemoyne, French artist, involved as a visual recorder and spiritual sensitive through painting. Stephen Lorentz, popular travel blogger with a channel dedicated to the most haunted places in Europe. The room was filled with a sense of curiosity mixed with unease. "Not everyone has the courage to enter," Professor Karl said, his voice even but authoritative. "We will document everything, images, sounds, even feelings, and if we're lucky, the presence of death." "And if we're not lucky?" Clara asked, her gaze sharp as a knife. "Then we'll become part of the forest." John Ellis spoke, his voice low, but his eerie excitement was undeniable. They all knew that some places should never be tread upon. But curiosity, fame, and the thirst for exploring the forbidden drew them together, like moths to a dim light at the end of a dark road. 3 days later, the all-terrain vehicle carrying the group ventured deep into the Heidenwald Forest. There were no houses, no cell phone signal, just dense ancient trees and the faint light from a cloudy sky. They stopped at an open field, a place the nearby villagers called the edge of the silent forest. Here, all sounds seemed to be sucked away. The wind didn't rustle, leaves didn't fall, birds didn't sing. Only the sound of their hearts beating in their chests remained. "Does anyone else feel like this place is not a normal forest?" Rachel whispered. "It's like it's watching us," Jane murmured, her hand trembling as she sketched the scene in a pencil. On the paper, the trees no longer looked like trees, but like figures hanging upside down. Professor Karl planted the positioning stake and declared, "Tonight, we'll rest here. Tomorrow, we begin our journey deeper into the forest." That first night, the camp glowed dimly under the campfire. Everyone tried to keep calm, but the night would not let anyone rest. Around midnight, a faint shriek echoed from a distance. Clara sprang up from her tent. In the weak light, she saw John Ellis standing motionless, his eyes wide, staring into the forest. "What are you doing out there?" Clara asked, her voice sharp. "There's something calling me," John replied, not turning around. He returned, but from that moment, everyone felt something had changed in his eyes. The next morning, One person was missing from the camp. John Ellis, who had once claimed to hear the souls, had completely vanished. All that remained were a pair of shoes covered in dark mud that looked like blood, neatly placed in front of the tent. John Ellis disappeared as if he had never existed. Early in the morning, the group panicked when they discovered John's tent had been left wide open. The blanket was still warm, but the owner was nowhere to be found. Near the tent, his old leather shoes were neatly placed on the ground, and his bare feet had left in the cold, dark night. Professor Carl stared thoughtfully at the footprints left on the waterlogged soil, stretching deep into the dense forest. "We must not split up, even to search for him," he said, his voice firm but tinged with regret. "We'll stick to the planned route. If John is still alive, we will meet him again." No one agreed, but no one dared oppose him. Clara, the bold journalist, secretly recorded a few video clips of the footprints in the empty tent. She planned to use them for her article, The Haunted Expedition, if she survived the journey. As the group continued their journey, the Heidenwald forest seemed to swallow the light. The tree canopies intertwined, creating a dark dome overhead. The cold wind cut through their clothes, bringing the musty smell of moss and something that resembled rotting flesh. This smell. It's not right. Bobby, the ex-soldier, frowned. He raised his rifle, his eyes scanning constantly. "Don't go crazy now," David chuckled weakly, still filming with his shoulder-mounted camera. "It could just be the scent of a dead animal." "Dead is right," Jane whispered. "This smell is of death." By midday, they reached a clearing in the forest where a crumbling stone monument stood, covered in green moss and old dried blood stains. Beneath the stone, ancient carvings were etched by hand. "Nur im Tod wirst du hören, only in death will you hear." Rachel bent down to wipe off the moss. When her fingers touched the stone, a cold shiver ran down her spine. "This is old German script, 12th century," she said. "It could be the grave of a ritualist." Jane sketched the carving, but her hand trembled uncontrollably. In her drawing, not only was the stone visible, but shadows appeared behind the trees, as though something was watching them from afar. The second night. The camp was set up at the foot of a small mound, where no grass grew and no trees took root. Clara frowned. "This place feels like someone has buried something here," she said. "Or someone," Bobby added. None of them slept well. Strange noises echoed through the forest, like the rustling of someone walking barefoot on dry leaves, like whispers that couldn't be understood. Around midnight, Rachel suddenly woke up, drenched in sweat. She heard someone calling her name, over and over, slowly, drawn out. "Rachel! Rachel!" She crawled out of the tent. In the faint light of her flashlight, Rachel saw a familiar figure in the forest, a thin figure wearing a brown cloak, standing with its back turned. "John?" she called softly, her heart racing. The figure didn't turn around. It simply raised a hand, then vanished. Rachel ran back in panic. But when she reached the camp, everyone was already standing outside their tents, their eyes wide with horror. "Blood," Clara whispered, pointing to Rachel's feet. They were covered in blood. "No, this isn't mine," Rachel stammered, trembling. The next morning, they went to trace the origin of the blood, and they found John Ellis. His body was hanging upside down from the branch of an ancient tree, his eyes wide open, mouth agape. On his chest, there were claw marks that had carved into his skin. "Jetzt hörst du. Now you listen." No one dared say a word. That evening, they buried John under the ancient stone monument. Jane sketched the burial scene, and in her drawing, a shadow appeared behind Professor Carl, tall, faceless, with arms as long as tree branches, standing motionless, watching them. The wind blowing through the Heidenwald forest the next morning carried with it a strange, pungent smell, one that reminded people of dried blood and rotting meat under the light sun. Everyone ate a cold breakfast in silence, none daring to discuss the events of the previous night. John Ellis was dead. Brutally. No one spoke it out loud, but everyone silently wondered who would be next. Jane, the artist, didn't eat. She sat apart from the group, fixated on her sketchbook. She wasn't drawing, just flipping through the pages. Some of the sketches from the day before had changed, smudged lines, dark gray colors bleeding out as though someone had touched them with a blood-soaked finger. In one of the drawings, the shadow behind Professor Carl was more distinct. It had eyes, white, hollow, staring directly at the viewer. But Jane insisted, "I didn't draw those eyes." The group continued their journey. They moved deeper into the forest to a section where trees had been snapped, seemingly by some immense force. Branches were scattered everywhere. A large oak had been broken in half, and something inside the tree seemed to glisten. Rachel, the expert on ancient symbols, approached. She used a knife to scrape off the rotting bark, revealing a glass eye embedded in the trunk, as if someone had planted it there long ago. "This isn't a toy," she said, her voice trembling. "It's a sacrificial item, the mark of an ancient ritual." Bobby jumped back in shock. Who would stick a human eye into a tree? "Not a human," Rachel replied, her eyes fixed on the glass eye. But something they worshipped. The third night, they didn't set up camp. They sheltered in a cave near a dried-up stream. Jane sat against the cave wall, silently continuing to draw. Outside, the wind howled through the rock cracks like a wail of sorrow. Everyone curled up in their sleeping bags, trying to sleep, except Jane. In the weak beam of her flashlight, Jane whispered to herself, "Don't look at me anymore. I know. I drew all of you, but I didn't want to see it." Clara heard the whispering and approached. She found Jane furiously sketching. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, yet she kept drawing, picture after picture, all the same. A contorted face, mouth open as if screaming without sound, and eyes. No eyes. "Jane?" Clara placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. Jane jerked, turning around. Her eyes were wide, without pupils, her mouth open, but she couldn't make a sound. She had lost her voice. The next morning, Jane sat huddled in a corner, tears streaming down her face, her mouth moving silently. When the others tried to ask what had happened, she just shook her head, then picked up her pen and began to draw. The first drawing she showed them made everyone freeze. A corpse. Eyes gouged out. Lying in the forest, mouth agape as if screaming. And surrounding the body were ethereal creatures, shapeless, just darkness crawling through the trees and stones. "She's been silenced by something," Carl said. "This is no longer superstition. This is a real phenomenon." Rachel took the drawing and compared it to the notes in her ancient book. Her eyes widened when she turned to page 47. This is a description of a ritual, the silent hearing rite. According to legend, the first person who sees the eye of the Nameless One will be marked. If they try to describe it, they will lose their voice. Clara laughed, but it was a half-mad laugh. "So, Jane's cursed because she drew that thing?" Rachel didn't answer. She simply nodded silently. That afternoon, they found a dilapidated wooden house hidden among the thick trees. A spiral symbol made of bird bones hung on the door, identical to the faded tattoo on John's hand before he died. They entered. Inside the house was an altar covered in dust, with dozens of glass eyes, each one staring at a large mirror draped in black cloth. "No one looks into the mirror," Carl ordered. But David, the cameraman, ignored him. He slowly pulled the cloth away. Silence. The mirror didn't reflect anyone from the group. It only showed the empty room except for one thing. Jane, sitting in the corner, repeating her drawing. Then suddenly, in the mirror, Jane looked up at David. Her eyes were hollow, but her mouth was smiling. David collapsed onto the floor, frothing at the mouth, his eyes rolled back. He twitched violently, then went still. They helped him up. David was still alive, but he was completely blind. The fourth morning, no one could sleep. Jane still couldn't speak, and David was completely blind, lying curled up like a wounded animal. Clara sat and wrote in her personal diary. We thought this was a spiritual exploration, but clearly we are being tested by an ancient and ruthless force. It doesn't kill immediately. It steals away parts of us, the voice, the light, the sanity. And I fear we are not the last ones. They decided to leave the wooden house. The mirror had been shattered by Rachel with a large stone, but breaking the mirror did not break the curse. David still could not see. Jane still could not speak. Carl led the group deep into the forest, hoping to find an exit to the east, where the locals had mentioned a trail. But the forest was no longer as it appeared on the map. The trees seemed to be moving. What used to take them 3 hours to walk now took 6, and they still couldn't get out of the familiar area. Carl even saw the same oak tree that had been bent over before, with a glassy eye mark in its trunk. "We're going in circles," Clara said, worried. "No. Worse, we're being pulled back." Carl didn't believe it. He took out his compass. The needle spun endlessly, as though it couldn't even find a direction. GPS signal was lost. Bobby, the assistant cameraman, started to panic. "This isn't natural. This forest doesn't want us to go anywhere." By afternoon, the rainstorm hit. The group took shelter under a large tree. Rachel flipped through an ancient book, searching for an explanation. In the dim light, she pointed to a passage in Latin. "Silva non est solum locus, silva est judicium." The forest is not just a place, it is a judgment. Carl frowned. "You mean this forest is like a ritual?" Rachel nodded. "We have inadvertently stepped into a maze of rites. Each one of us will be tested by fear, guilt, or something we've hidden." They all exchanged glances. No one spoke. That night, they set up camp under the trees. David began whispering meaningless words. His voice changed, low and cracked like rotting wood. His eyes were still pure white, lifeless. Clara approached him, placing her hand on his forehead. He suddenly gripped her hand tightly and whispered, "Someone among you is carrying something that belongs to them. That thing needs to be returned, or else blood will continue to flow." His voice was no longer David's. Jane sat apart, silently sketching. On the paper was an image of a spiraling circle inside the shape of a tree, with a person hanging upside down, blood dripping onto the leaves. Rachel jumped. She recognized it, the ancient symbol of the Tree of Judgment, a kind of soul tree in Nordic legend, where those who carry sins are exposed to their past and punished unless they repent. In the middle of the night, Bobby vanished. No one heard footsteps, no screams. He seemed to evaporate from the camp. They only discovered a long trail of blood leading to a depression in the forest. There, a tall black maple tree as high as a church spire stood alone. Its branches drooped like thick hair. Beneath it, hanging from the highest branch, was Bobby's body. His mouth was sewn shut with thorny vines. On his chest, carved into the skin with a knife, were the words, "We didn't listen to the warning." Carl screamed in shock, but Rachel held him back. "This is the Tree of Judgment. Anyone who carries a hidden past will be judged. We are no longer just explorers. This is a ritual of trial, and each of us will be called out." Jane pointed to her notebook, where she had drawn a figure burning. That person was wearing Carl's exact clothes. It was not yet dawn, but the forest had turned an eerie gray. No bird songs, no wind, no sound at all. The group sat beside Bobby's body, hanging limp from a tree. None dared to cut the rope with a knife. Carl, the archaeologist and leader of the group, tried to stay calm, but his hands were shaking. Not from the cold, but because deep down he knew. The curse had singled him out. The night before, Carl had a strange dream. He found himself standing in an old, decrepit wooden room, the very house of his old teacher in Norway. On the table was an ancient manuscript, its ink still wet. Professor Rasmus, his late teacher, stood with his back to him, holding a half-burnt piece of wood. He turned his head, his face devoid of eyes, only deep, bleeding sockets. "Carl, you've taken something that doesn't belong to you, and now the forest will burn you just like I was burned." Carl woke up with a start. Outside the camp, the wood was still smoldering, despite the rain. The next morning, Rachel confronted Carl. She held out his research journal. The last page was torn off. "Is this page a note about the Yggdrasil ritual, the judgment of sins?" Carl remained silent. His face went pale. Jane, sitting nearby, quietly sketched in her notebook. A grave, dug up. A bony hand reaching out, grabbing a book. Rachel pressed on. "You once dug an illegal grave in Norway. They say you took something forbidden, a carving of the soul of the judgment tree. That's something you never published. That's what's pulling all of us into this deadly ritual." Carl jumped to his feet. "You don't understand. I just wanted to study it. I was going to return it after I finished taking notes. But Rasmus, my teacher, found out, and he died in a fire, no reason given." His voice cracked, panic rising. In the afternoon, Carl went missing. No one saw him. When Clara and Rachel found him, he was kneeling beneath a giant blackened tree, holding a stone carved with ancient runes. His body was drenched in sweat, his eyes wide as if he was seeing the past. Clara stepped back from the smell of burning. There were no real flames, but the ground beneath them was emanating intense heat, as if something was smoldering under the forest floor. Rachel looked down at the stone. It had the name of Professor Rasmus. This was the memorial to Carl's old teacher, something he had built himself, buried in the forest to hide his past. "I warned you," a voice rasped in the wind. "You burned me, then buried me. You think my soul will be silent." Suddenly, the trees around them began to smoke. The tree's trunk caught fire, spreading quickly despite the rain. Rachel shouted, "Run!" But Carl didn't run. He hugged the stone, shouting, "If this is the price, then I accept it. Spare them. It's my fault." Fire, the unreal fire that burned flesh and bone, erupted from the ground and consumed him in less than 10 seconds. Clara could not forget his scream, a cry of regret, fear, and atonement. The fire stopped shortly after. Only a patch of ash remained, and in the center, a figure-shaped heap of ash. Kneeling after Carl died, Jane walked over, quietly placed her sketchbook down on the pile of ashes, and pointed to the burning tree. Rachel and Clara dug it up. They found a small piece of jade inscribed with the characters, "If Brunn, the soul has been named." Rachel trembled as she said, "This is one of the 3 pieces of the original carving. If we gather all 3 pieces, we can perform the ending ritual. But if not, the forest will continue to kill us one by one." Clara whispered, "How many more nights?" Rachel looked up at the sky. 3 nights, 3 people left, and 2 more pieces of the soul to find. That night, the makeshift camp by the small stream saw no one sleep a wink. The wind blew long gusts through the trees, carrying sounds that resembled murmurs, whispers in an ancient language no one could understand. Clara tried to calm herself by writing down what had happened, but her pen shook uncontrollably in her hand. Rachel sat quietly by the small fire, her eyes fixed and unblinking. Jane, the quietest one in the group, began whispering to a tree at the edge of the camp. "It's calling," Jane whispered. It says there's a way out." Rachel walked over gently. "Jane, who's calling?" Jane looked up. Her pale gray eyes gleamed with an eerie look. "The tree knows everything, but it can't speak. It only whispers in dreams." At dawn, Jane was missing. Small footprints led to an ancient grove of intertwined trees like a maze. Rachel and Clara ran after, calling desperately. In the midst of the trees, they discovered a massive tree trunk, wide enough for two people to hug. Its bark cracked open as if hollowed from the inside. And inside, they found Jane sitting, quietly, her hand resting on a small glowing stone. Clara screamed, "Jane, get out of there!" But Jane just turned her head, her voice soft as the wind. "The path is open. I can see them, the dead. Bobby, Professor Carl, and someone else, waiting." Rachel stepped in and pulled Jane out. The glowing stone fell, the second piece of the soul inscription. The stone was engraved with the words Thagn, the one who hears the forbidden. "Jane has traded part of her soul to hear the voice of the forest," Rachel said. "This is the price." After returning to camp, Jane became strange. She wouldn't eat or sleep, just sat drawing, but this time, not with a pencil. She used dirt, dried blood, and charcoal to draw on the tree trunks. Pictures of people being pulled into the earth, faceless souls, arms growing from roots, strangling the living. Clara, terrified, ripped each drawing apart, but by nightfall, the pictures reappeared, this time on Jane's skin. Rachel decided to search for answers in the old notes left by Carl. One page contained a handwritten passage in Old Norse. "The third person, if they hear the trees, will have their soul pierced by the roots of the forest. They will be the eyes and ears of the woods. Not dead, but no longer alive." Jane was the third person. That night, Jane whispered deliriously, "There's a tomb under the twin trees, where the last piece waits. But whoever takes it will be kept. No one can hold all three pieces." Rachel looked at Clara, her voice low. "If we want to live, one of us must sacrifice." The next morning, the group followed Jane's instructions and came to a massive twin tree, two trunks entwined like two snakes wrapped tight. At the base of the tree was an opening. The smell of mildew, dampness, and decaying flesh filled the air. Near the opening was a broken stone slab, the inscription faint but still readable. "The one who descends here, if greedy, will never return." Clara volunteered to go down. Rachel protested, but Clara said, "I've never done anything brave in my life. This is the moment." Below was a natural cave, light filtering through the gaps in the tree roots. Clara followed the rock walls until she saw a round stone platform, and on it was the final piece of the stone, glowing a faint, eerie green. As she stepped forward, the rock walls began to groan. From all sides, roots grew like tentacles, creeping towards her, forming shapes of people. A voice echoed. A woman's voice, soft but deafening. "You can take it, but you will take its place." Clara screamed, "I don't want to die." The voice responded, "You will not die. You will be the earth, the forest, the watcher." Clara grabbed the stone. The cave began to collapse in chunks. She screamed up, "Rachel, take it!" A burst of light shot up from the ground. The third stone flew into the air, and Rachel caught it. She turned to look. Clara was gone. Only a small sapling remained, oozing red sap like blood. Now Rachel held all three pieces, but Jane was growing weaker, as if her soul was slowly draining away. Rachel placed the three pieces on the ground in the center of the forest, as described in the ancient ritual. She cut her hand and let her blood drip onto each piece. Jane whispered, "One must sacrifice part of their soul to seal it. If not, the soul of the forest will choose a replacement." Rachel nodded. She was ready, but Jane stepped forward, placed her hand on the stone and whispered, "I hear Clara's voice. She doesn't want you to die. Let me." The three stones began to glow, then turned to dust, scattering as blue light into the surrounding tree trunks. The sky turned a pale gray. The forest shuddered as if taking a deep breath. The curse was broken. After the ritual, the forest fell silent. Rachel carried Jane, the small body now as light as a shadow, pale skin, fragile breath. The trees no longer whispered. The wind ceased. The sun, for the first time in many days, shone a warm, golden light through the gaps in the leaves. They returned to the camp, where only two remained: Rachel and Jane. Bobby, Professor Carl, and now Clara, all had stayed behind in the forest. Rachel stood before the tree that Clara had become, quietly carving a line with her knife. Clara, the one who sacrificed herself so others could live. Immediately after, something strange happened. A path appeared where there had previously been dense forest. A sweet fragrance wafted through the air like jasmine soaked in blood. Jane suddenly spoke, very clearly. That is the way out. But only one may go ahead. The other must wait. Rachel froze. Why? Jane replied, her voice flat. The forest needs a witness. The living must remember. The one who carries the memory will be marked. Rachel hugged Jane, looking up at the sky. I will carry it. I will be the one to bring the memory out. They walked out of the forest. As they crossed the path, Rachel felt as if an invisible thin skin tore along her back. A burning sensation ran down her spine. She collapsed. Jane caught her, whispering, "The forest has marked you. You are the one to bring the truth out. But no one will believe." No one, Rachel cried. Not because of the pain, but because she knew what she had witnessed would remain a secret between her and that forest forever. 2 weeks later, Rachel and Jane were found at a forest ranger station near the Swedish border, emaciated, gaunt, with nothing but a notebook and a torn backpack. The police asked where they had been, why they had been missing for nearly 3 weeks, but Rachel only answered, "Lost in the forest. My friends weren't so lucky. An accident." No one believed them. The news reported the mystery exploration group went missing. Only 2 survivors, no one remembers anything. When they returned to London, Rachel began having recurring dreams every night. In the dream, she walked on a path covered in tree roots, where the faces of her friends appeared in the tree trunks. Bobby with a cold smile, Professor Carl whispering ancient formulas, Clara standing still with eyes leaking tree sap. Jane, now living with Rachel, slept deeply. But sometimes she would speak in her sleep in ancient Nordic. Once, Rachel recorded it. She took the recording to a professor of ancient languages, and he said, "This child is talking about the second gate. That the gate isn't fully closed." Rachel froze. The next month, Rachel received a package with no sender. Inside was a photo of the forest, taken from above, marked with an ancient symbol. The accompanying message read, "Only one person ever escaped, but never truly left." At that moment, Rachel looked into the mirror. Behind her, the burn mark from the forest, now spread into the shape of an eye, a tree opening. It was blinking. She collapsed. Jane rushed to her, holding her hand. "You'll never leave, Rachel." Rachel could no longer distinguish between day and night. She began to find herself walking in the forest, even though she was lying in her small apartment in London. In her sleep, she walked barefoot, blood dripping onto the roots of the trees, listening to the faint calls from the deepest parts of the forest. "Come back. We're not done." Every morning, Rachel woke up with her hands full of dirt, her nails broken and scratched, smelling of tree sap. Jane became quiet. She stared at the darkest corners of the room. Under the bed, the kitchen corner, the wardrobe. One morning, Rachel saw Jane drawing with charcoal on the bedroom wall, a picture of 5 shadowy figures standing around a large tree with eyes, with a circular symbol above it like a gate. Rachel's hands trembled as she took the drawing down. But that night, the image reappeared, with deeper lines, drawn in blood. On the 9th day after receiving the strange photo, Rachel got a call from an anonymous number. A man's voice whispered, "Do you think you're the only one who survived? You're wrong. We all got out, but we can never escape. The forest follows me home. You'll see." Rachel screamed, "Who is this? Who are you?" "The first survivor, in 1923. Rachel began to remember things she had never experienced. A village burned under the blood moon. A child buried alive under the roots of a tree. A man stabbing his own heart with a wooden knife to stop the forest from spreading. These memories invaded Rachel's mind, causing her to speak an ancient language, calling out the names of those who had been dead for centuries. "I'm no longer Rachel," she murmured in the mirror. "I am the witness, the third eye." One night, Jane screamed loudly. Rachel rushed in and saw Jane pointing to the back of her neck. In the mirror, Rachel gasped. From the forest mark on her skin, a small branch began to sprout. It grew every night, becoming longer, like a living antenna picking up signals from elsewhere. Rachel wrapped it in white bandages, but it was useless. The next morning, the branch had leaves. Jane, still a child, began to speak like an adult. The forest is a living being. It doesn't want anyone to forget. It places eyes on the survivors, and you, Rachel, are the brightest eye. One night, Jane drew on the fogged-up window the image of the central tree with roots plunging deep into a person's head. That's the second gate. It doesn't open out there. It opens inside the brain. Rachel understood. She was becoming the host of the forest. At the end of this part, Rachel returned to the ancient library in Cambridge, where Professor Carl had once researched. She found an old, torn book, The Map of Souls in Scarnet. Inside was a photo of the 1923 archaeological team. 6 went in, only 1 came back. That person is now insane, living in an asylum in northern Scotland. That person's name is Edgar Home, the one who had called her. Rachel left London in the night. The train rolled toward the desolate highlands of northern Scotland, where the Carrowmere Asylum was, the place where Edgar Home lived. The sky was foggy, and the air was cold, cutting through the skin. The gray sky made the entire journey feel as though it was entering the realm of the dead. "I need to know the truth," Rachel told herself. "I need to know why I survived, and why something is living inside me." According to the records, Edgar Home should be nearly 130 years old by now. But when Rachel looked through the one-way glass, she froze. The man in the room appeared to be around 70, with wrinkled skin but sharp, vibrant eyes. The nurse whispered, "He doesn't eat much, barely sleeps, but he's still alive like a leech. We call him the Immortal of Carrowmere." The meeting room's lights suddenly went out. They could only speak in the dim red glow from the emergency lights. Edgar looked at Rachel with his bloodshot eyes. "You've seen it, haven't you? The forest, the central tree, the eye of eternal life. You think you survived by luck? No, it chose you, just as it chose me. But I refused." Rachel was silent. "Why me?" "Because you still have someone to love. The child. It will bind you to your humanity, but the forest will consume whatever you love, if you don't make a trade." Edgar recounted, in 1923, his group consisted of 6 people, archaeologists, anthropologists, a priest, a monk, an artist, and him. They discovered that the Scarnet Forest was cursed. It was once an ancient sacrificial site where the ancients called the forest spirits through blood rituals. The central tree, where Rachel had once gone, was not just a tree. It was a gateway to the borderland. Entering the forest meant making a pact with the darkness. Each person in the group died in a different way. Their souls were taken, burned alive, tied to roots and skinned, or driven to madness and suicide. Edgar was the last one left, but he severed the roots from himself with fire, self-immolated his hands, and sealed his ears with beeswax to block out the calls. He survived. But every day he dreams of the dead returning, whispering in his ears. Before Rachel left, Edgar handed her an object wrapped in red cloth. A smooth black wood fragment, intricately carved in the shape of an eye. "This is a piece from the central tree. I cut it before I left the forest. It's the key, but also a double-edged sword. You'll need it to open the final path, or to close the gate forever." Rachel held the object tightly, her hands trembling. On her way back, when the car passed through the moorlands near the edge of the scarlet forest, Rachel saw from a distance a figure standing on the hill with their back to her, wearing a worn coat, just like Sarah. The car sped past, and the figure turned around. There was no face, only an empty hollow with roots growing out. After her meeting with Edgar Holm, Rachel returned to London but couldn't sleep peacefully. Each night, she found herself walking in the forest, her bare feet stepping on roots as soft as flesh, the air smelling of blood. A voice whispered in her ear, "We're not done yet. Bring the child. Complete the ritual." Rachel reviewed all the images, notes, and memory cards from the trip. She discovered a blurry video. It showed Ben, the cameraman, being pulled down into a deep hole by tree roots. But in a few frames, something appeared behind the tree. A shadowy figure, humanoid in shape, but with a hollow deer head and hands growing backwards, reaching out as if calling Ben. Rachel zoomed in on the image. In the lower right corner of the frame, there was a black wooden door, carved with an eye, exactly like the piece of wood Edgar gave her. "That's the gate," Rachel whispered. "The real gate." She rented a small off-road vehicle, bringing a flashlight, a knife, an infrared camera, holy water, and the black wood. This time, Rachel went alone. The scarlet forest was different from before. The trees had grown twice as dense and the old path was gone. But her feet still followed the right way, as though some ancient memory in her blood was guiding her. As the sun set, she reached the center of the forest. The giant black tree, with hundreds of pieces of human skin tied like prayer cords, stood there. The trunk split open, revealing the black gate carved with an eye. Rachel set up the camera. The atmosphere was suffocating. She stepped closer, placing the piece of wood into the groove of the gate. A click sounded. The gate opened slightly, revealing a narrow corridor made of tree roots, twisting like an animal's intestines. She stepped inside. On the walls were blood-painted murals depicting scenes of ancient people offering their firstborn to the forest god in exchange for eternal life. The last scene showed a red-haired woman, resembling Rachel, holding the body of a child, kneeling before the bleeding tree. In the tunnel, Rachel heard footsteps behind her. She turned around. No one, but the sound of malicious laughter echoed. It was Sarah's voice. "Did you bring it with you, the child? You know we were never meant to survive. You've forgotten the rule." Rachel screamed, "I didn't choose this." "No, but the forest chose you." At the end of the tunnel, Rachel saw a circular room with a stone pedestal in the center and on it a root cocoon twitching. From the cocoon came the sound of a baby crying. Rachel stepped back, horrified. The cocoon ripped open. From it crawled a grotesque figure, a pale child, eyes entirely black, with a mouth full of sharp teeth. "Hello, Mother," she screamed, raising the knife, but the child lunged and then turned to ash. A thunderous roar echoed. The room began to collapse. Rachel ran. She lit the flare, throwing it into the center tree's trunk. It caught fire, emitting a wail like that of a human. The flame spread quickly, burning the roots, the tree, and the path. Rachel ran out of the forest amid smoke and burning fire. On her shoulder, the black wood was cracking. The eye carved on it was bleeding black blood. Rachel returned to London, holding her young son. But when night fell, she opened her palm. The piece of wood had vanished, and in her son's eyes, there was a flicker of red light. Rachel returned to London with a heavy heart. She tried to get back to normal life with her son, Daniel, but every night she woke up from nightmares. Their little family had a period of peace, but then strange signs began to appear. Daniel, now 7 years old, was still cheerful, but sometimes, in his sleep, he would mumble incomprehensible things. "I see the tree. I see the black eye." At those moments, Daniel's eyes would glow strangely, as though someone was looking through him. Rachel began to worry. Could what she did in Scarlet Forest really be over? Or was this just the beginning? One night, when Rachel woke up to check on Daniel, she saw him sitting up in the dark, his eyes wide open like hollow stones, staring into a corner of the room. "Daniel, are you okay?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he simply pointed at the corner of the room where an old mirror stood. Rachel walked closer, and as she looked into the mirror, she felt a chill radiating from the glass. Inside the mirror, a vague shape appeared, as if a person were standing behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. Her vision blurred, and all she could hear was her own breath. That night, Rachel stayed up late, and once again fell into a strange dream. She stood before the black wooden door, the same door she had seen in Scarlet Forest. This time, she couldn't turn back. In the dream, the door opened, and Rachel stepped inside. She saw herself standing by a giant tree, its eyes still open, slowly turning toward her. Darkness began to fill the surroundings, and Rachel heard whispers. "You didn't finish it. You can't escape me." A figure appeared, faint and shadowy. It was Daniel, but with black, hollow eyes, and a mouth wide open as if to swallow everything. Rachel hurriedly pulled her son back, but he moved toward the tree, getting tangled in a root. Then she woke up. The dream lingered, painful and haunting. The next morning, Rachel decided to find Edgar home again. She couldn't solve this on her own, and only he could help her understand more clearly what was happening. She found him in the mental institution, just like before, calm, as if time had stopped. Edgar looked at her, his eyes deep. "What have you done, Rachel?" he asked in a low voice. Rachel recounted everything that had happened, from when she returned to London to the dreams she had been experiencing. Edgar frowned. "You couldn't break it, Rachel. The tree of the forest never dies. It only transforms, and if you think you can live without paying the price, you are wrong. You woke it up, and it wants you to pay the debt." Edgar began telling a story from the past, one he had never shared before. Long ago, Scarlet Forest swallowed an entire village. All the villagers were consumed by the darkness in the forest, and that force created successors, people who could cling to the souls of others to continue living. But that's not all. When you brought your son back to the roots, he began to change. The forest will devour him if you don't stop it in time. Rachel decided to return to Scarlet Forest, not to destroy it, but to alter her fate and free her son from the influence of the tree and the darkness. The next day, Rachel decided she could not wait any longer. The obsession with the forest and the strange occurrences had not subsided. It felt as though everything was coming alive in the darkness, and she couldn't control it. The journey back to Scarlet wasn't just a trip of a mother trying to save her son, but also a confrontation with the fears she had tried to forget. Rachel packed her bag, a small backpack, a flashlight, an old map of Scarlet that Edgar had given her. She knew the forest wouldn't let her go easily. Daniel was still fast asleep in his room, his eyes tightly shut, but his expression carried a sense of anxiety. She kissed his forehead gently and told him to be good and not to wake up until she returned. She couldn't bring him along this time. This was her fight. She drove, her mind constantly circling around what lay ahead. The scenery slowly changed as she neared Scarlet. The peaceful suburban forests gave way to a cold, eerie atmosphere. The trees now seemed to evoke fear, their branches cloaking the sky like a dark curtain, blocking out all light. Rachel was no longer the hopeful person she was the first time she came here. She had witnessed too many deaths, forgotten souls, and people drained of life by the mysterious existence of this forest. She arrived at the forest's gate, where Edgar had once told her she had to pass through in order to reach the heart where the great tree stood. She glanced around furtively, afraid to step forward, but as she turned to look at her car, an odd sensation washed over her, as if someone was standing right behind her. She spun around, but there was no one, only the thick fog rising, making everything blurry. The deeper she went into the forest, the more Rachel felt she couldn't turn back. Everything became so eerily quiet. No birds chirped, no wind rustled the leaves, just the sound of her own footsteps. Suddenly, a shadow flitted past her. She quickly turned around, but saw only a vague, ghostly figure walking ahead. She couldn't tell who it was, but she felt a chilling wave emanating from it. "Follow me," a voice called from ahead. The unfamiliar voice whispered from the past, and Rachel couldn't escape it. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. After a while, she realized she had wandered into an entirely new area. The ancient trees no longer looked like normal trees. They had distorted into forms that seemed to be absorbing the souls of those lost in the forest. Rachel stopped, looking around, trying to find a way back. She knew she couldn't retrace her steps. The path was now blocked by thick layers of leaves. She continued following the strange figure, and after some time, they reached a clearing where a gigantic ancient tree stood towering. This was the tree Edgar had warned her about. It wasn't just an ordinary tree, but a mystical one, said to be the grave of souls that had been erased. The figure turned and looked at Rachel. It was a man who seemed familiar, yet with strange features. His eyes were completely black, with no whites. "You can't escape. You are part of us." Rachel felt her heart stop. The sensation was unbearable, reminding her of the eerie dreams she had. "You can't save your son. You awakened us, and now you will be one of us forever." The voice echoed, and Rachel felt a powerful force slowly taking over her. "No!" she screamed, waking up and rushing toward the tree, but the roots from the ground had wrapped around her legs. The darkness surrounded her, but she didn't give up. Her eyes flickered with determination. "You cannot defeat this tree. It is the darkness," the man said. However, Rachel saw a small ray of light shining through a gap in the forest gate. With all her strength, she fought against the roots binding her. With desperate resolve, she refused to give in. The pain from the tightly coiled tree roots made Rachel feel as if her entire body was about to explode. However, in that moment, a wave of hope surged within her. She realized that she could not give up. She was too close to walk away. Death was not the only option. Darkness might seize her mind, but life is always stronger. Like a natural reflex, she turned her head, looking into the misty forest, and saw a faint light shining through the fog, as if there was a hallway leading her out of this place. She no longer hesitated. She had to follow that light. Even though the tree roots still clutched at her, the belief in an escape route had helped her break free from the forest's grip. "Follow the light. Don't let it disappear," Rachel whispered to herself, her eyes lighting up with determination. Rachel ran toward the ancient tree, and suddenly, under its dark bark, she noticed a small crack. These cracks were not random. They seemed like openings leading to another world. Just then, the strange figure reappeared. "You cannot escape it. This tree is not just a tree. It is a tomb, a place where the souls of the erased are kept," the man said, his voice echoing as if challenging her. But Rachel did not stop. She reached out her hand into the crack, feeling a cold draft. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and a secret path began to open up. Beneath the ancient tree, a deep, dark crypt appeared. The darkness thickened, and the light seemed to be swallowed up. She stepped in, feeling as though her body was being pulled into a distant place. As she walked down into the crypt, Rachel felt the chill of the space. The old stone walls passed by her eyes, and she could hear the whispers of the trapped souls within. It felt as if invisible hands were brushing over her body. Dim lights from afar made it impossible for her to determine the direction. She could no longer hear any sounds from the outside. Only her footsteps echoed in the silence. Her steps grew heavier, and the further she walked, the more it felt like something horrifying was waiting ahead. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, followed by a chilling cold. From the darkness, a faint figure emerged. It was Edgar, but now he was no longer the man she once knew. "You won't escape." Edgar's voice echoed in the silent space. His eyes had become dark, devoid of light. Rachel collapsed to the ground, feeling as though what she was seeing was not real. She staggered to her feet, trying to breathe, but the space around her became more and more obscure. She felt something invade her heart, a sensation of coldness and numbness beyond measure. "You will become a part of us," the voice continued to echo in Rachel's mind. She understood that she was not just facing the trapped souls of the forest, but also fighting against a supernatural power she had never encountered before. Suddenly, she remembered Edgar's warnings about not allowing the forest to claim her soul. She had to resist, but how could she do that when even this world seemed manipulated by dark forces? And then, she made a decision. The final step she had to take was to turn back and face the ancient tree once more. But this time, she was no longer afraid because she knew that the life of her son would be the only strength to break free from the grip of darkness. Rachel stood firm, pulling her hands away from the deep cracks in the ancient tree and turned to face everything that had come before. She knew that this journey wouldn't be easy, but it was the only choice she had to save her son. The light inside her finally flickered brightly, more radiant and powerful than ever before. Rachel could no longer feel the existence of her body. Everything around her was like an endless abyss, where the deeper she went, the more the darkness engulfed her. The sensation was no longer clear, as if some invisible force was pulling her into another realm. It seemed like the entire forest had turned into another world, one filled with souls that could not be freed. She saw the figures of the group, each one shimmering in pain. The faces were blurry, no longer holding the vibrant glow of life, but instead, pure suffering. Rachel felt these souls were calling out to her. A gust of cold air swept in, accompanied by the sound of wind whistling through the branches. And at that moment, a figure appeared right before Rachel. "You can't fight forever. It's all been decided." It was Edgar. However, now he was no longer the man she once knew. His eyes had completely changed, becoming dark and full of threat. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She couldn't let fear take control of her mind. Her soul was also being affected by what she saw. She stared directly at Edgar, no longer fearful, and reminded herself that she had to be stronger than ever. She couldn't let these souls drag her into the cycle of pain. "I won't let you win. I will save my son," Rachel said resolutely. She stepped toward Edgar, even though the darkness twisted around her as if wanting to consume every step. However, each step she took seemed to create a wave of light, pushing the darkness away. "If you want to save your son, you must give up everything," Edgar said, his voice as cold as ice. Rachel paused, took a deep breath, and became more determined than ever. She saw a bright door in the distance, the only exit, the way out that she had to fight for. She no longer had time to hesitate. She had to get past Edgar, pass through this night. At that moment, the souls around her began to writhe, screaming and banging their hands against invisible walls as if pleading for her help. Rachel understood that not only was she trapped, but these souls were too, stuck in an endless cycle of suffering. They couldn't move on, and part of the reason was Edgar, the one who led them here. She looked back at Edgar and realized that he didn't want to destroy her, but rather wanted her to join his world, a world with no life, where all souls were trapped forever. "I can't become a part of you. I can't leave my son behind." With all the strength she had left, Rachel charged into the darkness, passing through Edgar, and entered the bright door she had seen earlier. Suddenly, she felt a powerful force pushing her forward, as if someone were helping her. The bright door slowly opened, and the black shadows and souls were pushed back. As she walked through, the door slammed shut with a loud noise, blocking the dark figures and strange light. When she stepped out of the door, Rachel found herself in a lush green field. Gentle winds blew through her hair, and she saw the sun rising. The entire space around her seemed clearer than ever. Her son was standing there in the arms of a stranger. It was the storyteller, the one who had followed her throughout this journey. "Thank you for helping me," Rachel said, tears welling up in her eyes. She ran to hug her son, a feeling of peace she had never known before. "You've saved all of us," the storyteller said, smiling. The souls that were trapped in the forest were no more. They had been freed, and everything had returned to peace. Rachel sat on the lush green field, gazing into the distance where the sun had just risen. The surroundings were peaceful, with no darkness or gloom anymore. She tightly held her son's hand, feeling the warmth and safety from her little boy. After all the days of panic and fear, they had finally escaped death and the darkness. But this peace seemed incomplete. She still felt a deep sadness in her heart, a sense of missing her old companions, those who had sacrificed themselves during the journey. Edgar, James, Catherine, and all those who had passed still appeared in her mind. She still remembered them, the lost souls she couldn't save. "Thank you, Rachel," the storyteller spoke, sitting beside her. "Thank you for not giving up." Rachel looked at the storyteller, her eyes full of questions. "How was I able to do this? And why did you help me throughout the journey?" The storyteller smiled faintly. "I am part of these souls, part of the forgotten memories. But now, after everything you've been through, I can move on, just like your companions." She saw a gentle light emanating from the storyteller, then gradually disappear into the air. "We will no longer remain in the dark," he said before vanishing completely. Like a soul being freed, Rachel returned to her normal life, but the memories of the dark forest, of the journey to uncover the truth and save the souls, stayed with her like an indelible ghost. She could not forget the friends she had lost, the souls trapped in that world. But now, she had found peace within herself. Her son, after everything that had happened, had matured much more. He was no longer a small child, but a person full of determination and courage. Her son had become a great source of strength, helping her overcome all the challenges she faced. As the days passed, she continued to tell her son about the strange journey they had gone through and the souls she had met in the dark forest. Although they had left that world, in her heart, they would live forever. They had found their peace, and the memories of them would never fade. One day, as Rachel was walking with her son in their garden, she suddenly felt a familiar sensation wash over her. This feeling made her uneasy. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew through, carrying with it a strange scent that sent a chill down her spine. She turned to look at her son, but saw nothing unusual. As they continued walking, a shadow flickered in the distance. Rachel stopped, startled. A voice echoed from the wind. "We're not finished." Her legs felt weak, her heart pounding, but then she saw a familiar figure. It was Edgar, but not the one she had saved. He stood there, his eyes cold, full of scheming. "We cannot be forgotten. You didn't save us all," Edgar said, his voice reverberating in the air. Rachel felt a strange wave rush over her. The souls she thought had moved on might still be lingering in this world. But she was ready to face the final challenge. She turned back toward the darkness once again, knowing that there might never be a complete end. However, in that tense moment, a glowing light appeared from her son, stronger than any force Rachel had ever encountered. Her son stepped forward, his eyes shining brightly, and he said, "We're not afraid anymore." With her son's help, the darkness gradually faded, and Edgar, along with the other souls, was freed. They disappeared into the space, leaving behind a peaceful and serene atmosphere. Rachel and her son had overcome everything. They had fought and freed the trapped souls, and now they had found the peace they truly deserved. Though the shadow still lingered in her eyes, she knew that she had won. Not only had she saved her son, but she had also saved herself from the invisible darkness of fear. After all the terrifying events had passed, Rachel and her son's life began to return to a peace she had never experienced before. They moved to a small village where the air was spacious and quiet. The houses were built of old wood, surrounded by lush green fields and crystal-clear streams. It was a place where she could find solace and, more importantly, restore her spirit after everything that had happened. She began teaching her son lessons about strength and resilience. At night, they would sit together, telling each other stories about their new life and the journeys they had endured. Although the darkness had faded, The memories of the spirits they had freed still haunted them, like a shadow that refused to leave. One late afternoon, as she stood by the stream, watching the fish swim beneath the golden sunset, a sudden chill ran down her spine. She turned around, but saw nothing, only the calm, peaceful surroundings. Something didn't feel right, though she couldn't name it. When had she become this sensitive? One night, while she and her son were walking around the garden, a strange sound echoed from deep within the nearby forest. The wind howled through the trees, but it didn't sound like any wind she had ever heard. She held her son's hand tightly, but the boy just smiled and said, "It's probably just an owl, Mom." Still, the unease in Rachel's heart wouldn't subside. She remembered what had happened in the mysterious forest before. Could it be that the spirits they had released hadn't completely moved on? Or were they coming back to warn her of something dangerous? She returned home with a heavy feeling, as if something was waiting for them. But as she stepped inside, her son suddenly collapsed, his face pale. "Mom, someone's watching us." Rachel rushed him to bed, but his eyes wouldn't stop staring toward the window, where darkness had already fallen over the house. The next morning, as sunlight streamed into the room, Rachel felt as though she had just awoken from a strange dream. Yet the sense of unease still lingered in her mind. She took her son to school, but all throughout the trip, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still not completely safe. A few days later, she received a strange letter. It had no return address and no sender's name. She opened it. Inside, there was only a single line: "We have not left." Rachel stared at the sentence, overwhelmed by confusion. Perhaps they hadn't truly freed everything from the past. Maybe the spirits she thought she had helped still hadn't fully crossed over. She couldn't accept that. She needed to find out more. Rachel decided to return to the forest, where she and her friends had once faced horrifying mysteries. But this time, she wouldn't go alone. Her son would be with her. No matter how peaceful the world around her seemed, she couldn't ignore the signs she felt deep inside. They had to understand what was waiting for them. As they returned to the forest, Rachel sensed something strange in the air. The towering old trees, the worn stone walls, they all seemed to be hiding a truth she had yet to uncover. They ventured deeper, feeling the cold intensify with every step. When they reached a clearing, Rachel suddenly saw a shadowy figure standing silently in the darkness. It was a woman, dressed in a long white gown, her face blurred and emotionless. "Who are you?" Rachel asked, but received no reply. The woman simply stood there, silent. The figure slowly approached, but not to attack. She was another spirit, one that had yet to be freed. "What must I do so I can finally be at peace?" the woman asked, her voice sorrowful and trembling. Rachel looked into her sorrow-filled eyes and realized that these spirits remained because of one simple reason: they needed forgiveness. It was the most important lesson Rachel had learned in this journey. Sometimes, to truly free a spirit, it wasn't some grand act, but the power of forgiveness. The figure of the woman in the forest never took her eyes off Rachel and her son. She stood there, her face sorrowful, her eyes dim in the darkness. Rachel could sense the pain and disappointment in her gaze. There was no doubt anymore. She now understood that these souls didn't just need release from their physical forms, but from their spiritual torment as well. "What do you need to be freed?" Rachel asked, her voice gentle yet filled with solemnity. The woman smiled faintly, but it wasn't a joyful smile. It was cold and somber, as if she carried a pain that could never be erased. "Freedom doesn't come easily. To release me and the others, you must forgive what happened in the past and face the truth we've been avoiding." Rachel tried to understand. But these souls, what did they do to deserve forgiveness? Her question echoed through the chilling air, and the woman responded in a fragile voice. "We made grave mistakes. Mistakes we could never atone for while alive. But we have suffered enough. Now, forgiveness is the only key to our release." Rachel looked into the woman's eyes, sensing the sincerity in her words, though she didn't fully understand everything. She realized that in order to free these souls, she had to face the fear and pain she had carried since the beginning of this journey. She remembered all that she had been through, loss, pain, and nameless fears. But in this moment, she understood that only by forgiving those who caused that suffering could she set herself and the wandering souls free. "I forgive you," Rachel said, her voice steady, though tinged with difficulty. "I forgive everything that happened. I understand that no one is perfect and we all make mistakes." The woman in the shadows nodded slowly, her eyes beginning to fade, as if she could feel the change in the air. Suddenly, a white light spread across the forest, illuminating everything. The darkness that once enveloped them began to dissolve. As the light expanded, the woman was no longer there. She dissolved into the air like mist. And then, a gentle sigh echoed through the forest, like a breeze caressing the leaves. Rachel felt a wave of peace wash over her. The souls that had been trapped in the forest were finally released. Her son saw and felt the change too. "Mom, did we do the right thing?" the boy asked, his eyes filled with wonder and joy. "We absolutely did," Rachel answered softly, wrapping her arms around him. "We helped them find peace. From that moment on, everything around Rachel and her son seemed different. They no longer faced restless spirits or eerie mysteries. The forest had returned to its serene state, as if darkness had never touched it. Rachel decided to return to the home they had built in the village. She knew she had completed a long journey, and now it was time to begin a new life. Back in the small village, she resumed her daily routines, exploring the world with her son. And together, they finally found happiness in a life free of shadows. What they had endured could never be forgotten, but it was precisely those trials that made them stronger. Rachel looked up at the blue sky, where sunlight shone gently down. For the first time, she felt a serenity she had never known. Rachel and her son's life gradually returned to peace after everything they had endured in the haunted forest. Everything seemed to have settled, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. In the stillness of the night, she could still sense the presence of spirits, though they no longer surrounded her. One day, as she was walking past the village gate, Rachel saw a stranger standing in front of her house. He was an old man with a kind-looking face, but his eyes held a deep worry. He stared at her silently, as if contemplating something important. "Hello," Rachel broke the silence between them. "Can I help you with something?" The stranger nodded slowly. "I heard about your journey and the things that happened in the forest. I need your help." The old man led Rachel and her son deep into the dense forest they once traveled through, to an ancient house hidden beneath thick foliage. The house was unlike any other in the village. It radiated an eerie, ancient aura that immediately made Rachel feel uneasy. "This forest, this house," the old man began, "they all carry a story that no one has ever been able to decode. But recent events, the spirits you helped free, it's not over. Another force is waiting to rise." Rachel looked at him, feeling confused by his cryptic words. "What force? Is it connected to everything I've been through?" He nodded gently. "Yes, you helped the spirits of the forest find peace. But one spirit has not been released, a very powerful one, with a dark force that could destroy everything." A chill ran through Rachel at the old man's words. Though the trapped souls had been freed, she couldn't stop thinking about what he had just said. "Is this spirit the one responsible for the deaths of the members of the spiritual exploration group?" Rachel asked, concern tightening her chest. The old man lowered his head, pained. "Yes, this is the spirit of the one who caused all the tragedies in the forest. He is a being with a shadowy past, the one who imprisoned the others and fed on their lives to gain power. Now that the other souls are gone, he remains, trying to break free from this house." Rachel stared at the ancient building, doubt creeping into her heart. "So what do you want me to do? How can we fight a spirit that strong?" The old man looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "You've done it once before. Forgiveness is the key, but this time we need the help of all the souls you freed, and you You'll have to face the one who created all this suffering." Together with the old man, Rachel stepped into the ancient house. The air was so cold it felt like time had stopped. Dense shadows wrapped around them, strange sounds echoing from deep within the darkness. As Rachel moved deeper into the house, she sensed a strange force. Fear rose in her chest. Old wooden doors creaked open by themselves, revealing a vast chamber ahead. In the center stood an ancient altar, and upon that altar hovered a translucent figure, a spirit with glowing red eyes, laughing with a mad, guttural voice. "It's time," the old man said, his voice trembling. "You must face him." Rachel had no other choice. She stepped toward the altar, her heart filled with resolve. To defeat this spirit, she would need every ounce of strength she had, and she knew that courage and forgiveness would be her only weapons. "We're ending this," Rachel whispered to herself. Rachel approached the altar, her hand clutching the crystal pendant she always carried with her like a protective talisman. The spirit before her was no longer a faint shadow like the others she had encountered. It was a powerful and vengeful entity. Its eyes glowed red like fire, brimming with hatred. "I've been waiting for you a long time," the spirit chuckled, its voice like the breath of a monster. "You think you can stop me? You will not leave this place. No one can." A chill ran down Rachel's spine at the sound of its voice, but she didn't stop. She now understood she wasn't just fighting for herself, but for all the spirits who had suffered for so many years. "You can do nothing," the spirit sneered. "I've grown too strong. The other spirits, I've drained them of their strength. Now I will use it to destroy everything." Rachel knew she couldn't let that happen. She remembered what the old man had told her. To defeat this spirit, she had to use the power of forgiveness. But she also knew that to do so, she would have to confront the deepest wounds within her own heart. The spirit began conjuring illusions around Rachel. Terrifying visions appeared. Painful memories from her past came flooding back. She saw the face of her late husband, old friends, and the members of the paranormal investigation group. Each image carried unbearable sorrow. "You can't forgive what's happened, can you?" The spirit cackled wickedly. "You live in regret, always craving revenge. But don't you see, it's all just a game, a never-ending cycle." Rachel felt the weight of her pain, each wound falling like tears from her heart. But she couldn't let it consume her. She had to rise above it. She had to stay strong. Now Rachel understood. To defeat this spirit, she had to forgive herself. Forgive the mistakes of the past, forgive those who had hurt her, and forgive the fear she had nourished for so long. "I forgive," Rachel said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I forgive everyone who made me suffer. I forgive the spirits I may have hurt, and I forgive myself." The wicked spirit stood frozen for a moment, seemingly unable to believe what she had just said. A wave of light burst from Rachel's pendant, powerful like a tide crashing onto the shore. "I forgive you," Rachel continued, the light intensifying. "You no longer have the power to control me." As Rachel's words rang out, the evil spirit began to shatter. The darkness surrounding the old house slowly dissolved, as if it could no longer exist. The spirit thrashed and screamed in agony, but it could do nothing more. With the strength of forgiveness, the spirit was finally erased, leaving no trace in the forest or in the old house. The atmosphere inside returned to peace, free of shadows and nightmares. Rachel stood in silence, watching the transformation. Only serenity remained. The peace she and her son had longed for all this time. A deep sense of relief filled her heart, as if everything had finally been resolved and fear no longer had a place. But she knew that even though the ordeal was over, the lessons she had learned would stay with her forever. Rachel and her son returned to the village, carrying within them a peace they had never known before. The spirits of the forest had been set free, and their lives too had been reborn from the darkness. Though they had faced great challenges, they had found a way to live fully without being ruled by the past. Rachel knew the future still held many unknowns, but she was ready to face them. because she now understood every trial could be overcome with courage and forgiveness. Rachel stood by the riverbank, where the water flowed peacefully, reflecting the clear blue sky. Each ripple that lapped against the shore seemed to carry with it old memories, past sorrows. Her son, now older, sat beside her, tossing a small stone into the river, smiling as the ripples spread outward. They no longer feared the shadows of the past, nor did they worry about what had yet to come. They had broken free from the grip of spirits and the mysteries of the supernatural. Though the journey had been grueling and filled with pain, it had taught them invaluable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of love. Rachel knew she had finally found the peace she and her son had long yearned for. The spirits had been set free, and the forest, once full of darkness and dread, now glowed with light and serenity. The next day, Rachel and her son returned to their old village. Everything they had been through, all the fear and suffering, had become a part of the past. They found a new house, a place to begin again. A simple home, but warm and full of comfort, nestled right by the riverbank. The new house was more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of a fresh start. Rachel felt that she no longer had to live under the shadow of the past. She had freed herself from fear, and now she could finally live the life she had always dreamed of. She realized that forgiveness wasn't only a gift to others, but also a release for herself. Forgiveness had not only helped her overcome the evil spirit, but it had also helped her conquer her own deepest fears and wounds. Every day, Rachel and her son tended their small garden, cooked meals together, and shared warm, quiet moments. Despite all he had endured, her son remained cheerful, curious, and full of trust in life. "Mom, can we go fishing?" he asked, his eyes lighting up with excitement. Rachel smiled and looked at him. "Of course, my love. We'll go fishing, just like always." They walked hand in hand along the riverbank, no longer afraid, no longer burdened. Each step, each moment was a freedom they had earned through hardship. In Rachel's heart, one truth stood out clearly. Love was the strongest force of all. The love between her and her son had carried them through every trial, and it would continue to guide them in the days to come. Time passed, and everything around them seemed to come alive again, no longer haunted by ghosts of the old house or wandering spirits in the forest. Rachel realized the truth had finally been revealed, and she had accomplished something she once thought impossible. She had conquered the fear within her. One evening, as the sun was setting, Rachel stood by the river, watching leaves float gently across the water's surface. The scenery was peaceful, just like her life now. She no longer felt haunted by the past. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about cleansing the soul, making room for better things to grow. "Mom, I love you," her son shouted, wrapping his arms around her from behind, as if making a promise that they'd never be apart again. Rachel smiled and pulled him close. They were no longer alone, no longer lost. They had found happiness in life's simplest moments, and they knew nothing could take that away. One night, as Rachel and her son sat beside the fireplace, the flames flickering softly, she felt a calm warmth spread throughout their little home. The wind whispering outside no longer frightened her. She knew the darkness could no longer take hold of their lives. The stories of ghosts and restless souls were now just distant memories. Rachel and her son had found the light in their lives, and that light would continue to guide them. "Mom, are we reading a book tonight?" her son asked, his wide eyes gleaming. Rachel chuckled, resting her hand gently on his head. "Of course. Every night is a perfect night to read together." They read by the glow of the fire, in a space filled with love and peace. Thank you for joining me on this journey here on Decode the Mystery. I hope the story I just shared brought you a satisfying experience. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next mysterious tale. See you next time.